Okay, before we go charging off discussing custom data sources, I just wanted to do a little bit of a chat about VBScript and the data sources. So let's quickly nip into the VBScript here. Now, as it happens, I've put a button on the toolbar to run some code that we're going to do here. And what I wanted to draw your attention to was in the callout functions tab here, there's a complete section on data source callouts. So if we expand these, you see there are quite a few of them. And over the next few sections, we'll be going through quite a few, but I wanted to draw your attention to these two here. There's execute a data source, and that will execute the data source and return the data source or the result into an XML string into your VBScript. And there's a refresh, which would refresh the pane or list view from your code. The other callouts allow you to manipulate things like the custom data source by providing your own SQL statement, which you could build into your VBScript. You can validate keys on particular tables. You can change transaction types within transaction data sources, which we will do in another section. And for the web data source, web service data source, you can change any element of the URL, the body, or the HTTP headers that you actually want. And all these we will be covering in later sections. But I just come back to these two, and it raises quite an interesting concept in your VB scripting. So if I just simply double click this one here, it gives me a list of my query data sources. I'm just going to use the header as an example. And we can see that what it's going to do is it's going to run my customer header data source. It's going to put the result in this variable called return value. It could be any of your own variables. And we can put as many keys, I think up to 9 key, in effect key 0 to key 9, comma separated in here. So we just need, I'm just going to hard code the customer number in there, but clearly you could, you would bring in fields off the form or list view and so on like that. And we'll just bang in a message box for the time being here. Oops, if I could spell, it would help, wouldn't it? And so on. So we basically, when we bang the button, it's going to execute these. And just as an aside and a reminder, to make code easier, I like to put constants up here to relate the event ID for the button with a readable constant. I could quite easily have done that and it would work, but believe me, I've looked at some code on some things that people have written, and you just see a myriad of event IDs. You have no idea what they are. So I would strongly recommend, for readability, you use this technique. Okay, so let's see, we'll just do a syntax check. Okay, we'll save that. We'll run our app. That's good. And we're just going to press our button. And there it goes. So straight away, it's fired the business object and bump. Now, the reason I wanted to introduce you to that, in the earlier courses, we were running business objects through VBScript. We used the code generation bits. Let's just go and have a quick look at that. Okay, and you can select a business object, it will insert the code. As I said earlier on, when you do that, it generates 40 lines of code. And then, of course, you've got to do something with it. So what this lends itself to is being able to set up a data source which you may not use to populate forms or list views or anything. You just simply want it to execute and return the code into your VBScript, which is actually quite useful. That's that on there. And now we'll just move on to other aspects of using ADO/DB as well. Right, well, the next thing I want to discuss with you is querying SQL databases directly, either the Syspro database or probably more pertinently, external databases so that you're able to use App Designer as sort of an integration tool and things like that. So there are fundamentally two ways of doing this. I'm going to start with VB scripting and the ADO DB ActiveX control to show you briefly how that works, and that leads us on to the Syspro extended DB custom data source, which sets the scene quite nicely. So I've nipped over to a little test system that I had earlier on, and I just want to show you a couple of bits and pieces in there. If we run it, just to show you what it does. Okay, it's fairly straightforward. It's got a server name, Syspro database company name here, and a SQL statement. We'll select a number of fields from the AR customer master where our customer number is 1. And if we simply run that query, we'll get some data back, and hey presto. So this was a demo, a test whilst we were developing bits and pieces, but I want to show you the code behind this. Okay, now basically to begin with, I'm just on initialization, I'm just filling in the combo boxes with some default data. Interestingly, whilst we're in here, and the system variables, which you'll find here, system variables, you find all sorts of things that again you need to explore. One of them being the company database name, and one being the SQL Server name, which is really quite useful for what we're actually doing. And then I've hard coded a bit of a query here. Now, what I actually wanted to show you though is the part of the code that actually does the work. So this is this little query here. Now the run query is taking a query string, database name and a server name, and is basically going to be starting, and if we see down here at line 101, creating a connection or an ADO DB object so it can talk to the database. Now what an ADO DB connection needs is it needs a connection string, which is in effect going to say to it, how are you going to access the database? Well, in this case on line 95, we're going through OLEDB. Where is it? Well, it's actually on this server here. What is it, or what's the database? There's the database name. And above all, who are you, and do you have permission to do this? Well, this little bit of code here basically says I'm using Windows authentication, and as long as I'm authenticated, then I'm fine to get at the database. So you can see that the connection string is a critical path which goes from your VBScript and connects directly to the SQL database and says, right, now I understand where we're going and that you've got permission. What do you actually want to do? And what we wanted to do was, in effect, if we go back up here, this query, and we execute the query, it comes back into our VBScript, and we process it. And I think down here, I'm banging out, looping over it, coming up with some XML and putting it back into that text box. Okay, so the reason I wanted to explain that is that this works extremely well. It's fast. It's supported Microsoft technology. It accesses things like SQL and Access and Excel and you name it, and it works very, very well. The dilemma that you've got though is that it works well on a local area network, but you start to struggle on a wide area network. So, and by that I mean if you've got maybe another office and you're running client server, the problem is that the ADO DB object needs a direct connection to your SQL database, and in a network, or a wide area network, your server will be behind a firewall, normally with all the ports shut, so that you can't get any a budding hacker coming onto your server. Now the problem with all the ports shut is that ADO DB can't see the server, so it'll come back saying doesn't work. So what the solution to that is that you open a number of ports. I can't remember what they are now, but they're well documented, just a couple of them, and it'll all work beautifully, and which is fine. But in some places, particularly when you're hosting your servers in a third-party environment, these people are very reluctant to open ports because it opens up the whole server side of things, and therefore from a security point of view they don't like it. So you can quickly come unstuck with ADO DB if you are looking at wide area networks and stuff like that. So what we actually decided to do was say, well, we could probably do something a little bit better than this. We know that we can use Syspro's business objects, client server, over a wide area network. It doesn't need ports being open. So how are we going to piggyback that? Well, we developed a business object called AVTTES. And what this enables Syspro to do is run a .NET user control on the server and get the answers back across the Syspro's client server architecture. And what Syspro have provided is a .NET user control called Extended DB, which allows us to query any database using OLEDB or ODBC on the server and get the responses back to the client. Now, this is quite exciting because, of course, with ODBC and OLEDB, this means you can query things like SQL, Postgres, Access, Excel, you name it. You can actually hit most third-party databases using this technology. And it suddenly opens up the app designer to be a really effective integration tool. So what I want to talk to you about, or what we're going to go on to now, is the use of custom data sources in this. And I hope I haven't rambled on too much, but you can see this is all well documented on the internet, how to use this stuff. And you can always give me a ring anyway, or email me rather, if you want a bit more info.